know, I never wanted to go back to that refugee camp. Because when you see Len start crying, now I told myself, you know, it's too beautiful to cry, what we have achieved so far. I was in that refugee camp in 1978, and I left in 1978. I was one of the luckiest one to leave. Not too many of them left. There's over 500,000 refugees in eastern Sudan in the middle of nowhere. Still, 1,800 people arrive today. Every month, 1,800 people, knowing that they will be called the forgotten refugee. Just imagine that. You don't have a first name, you don't have a last name, you don't even have a number. Your name is the forgotten refugees. And they were given actually by the United Nations. So every time I would think of that place, I always wanted to go back. But I knew that my life will never be the same when I go back. And I was comfortable here. My dream and my desire was to come to America, you know, the land of opportunity. And it was great for me, education, business, engaged 4 times. Every time I talk to my mother, it's like, is he a doctor? I grew up actually Muslim, but the Jewish mothers and the Muslim mothers are so the same. No wonder they have a problem. So no, he's not a doctor. Finally, I got a doctor. But by the time I got a doctor, it was too late. I was ready to go to Africa. So I went back. Well, going back, I armed myself by the knowledge and the education, what I could do in Africa. And it's really interesting. We heard, who was one of the speakers, saying that in the West, we have an idea what we could do for Africa. So after 30-some years in America, we became so westernized, I knew what they needed. So I went back thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do to help them. But that's not what they needed. So in 2008, with some great friends, and Lynn is one of them, and they were there with me for about 10 days, the group that came with me. And then after 10 days, they said, let us show you, without the Westerners, the real refugee camp. So I visited. I called it poverty tourism. Every refugee camp that I went, they didn't have enough food, not clean water. But you know, the one thing that they wanted was a high school for their girls. And there's not even one high school in the refugee camp. And in Africa, because of their traditions and cultures, high school really is built for boys. But every mother that I talked to wanted a high school for their daughters. And I said, that's impossible. I can't build you a high school. There is no high school in the refugee camp. Not alone high school for girls. I can't even build a high school for boys. And many tried. Well, they said, what did America give you? And I always say that America, Africa gave me birth, but America gave me life. And they said, that's what we want for our girls. We know it might take you 7 years, it might take you 10 years. That's all we have. We've been here for 40 years, 3 generations. So all we got is time. So, well, I'll just go to a different refugee camp. Maybe they want clean water. So I did. You think they had a meeting before I arrived. Every refugee camp that I went, they want a high school for their girls. So I went to the United Nations and said, I want to build a high school. How can I get the fund here? Because Sudan there is an embargo here, so you can't just put, if you want to build a school in India, put the fund here, and the organization, that local organization would just get the money and build high school. In Sudan, you can't do that. So United Nations wanted 25%. So we gotta really, it's a great organization, but it's an organization that needs to be cleaned out a little bit. So I said, if the school cost me $100,000, believe me, it costed me a lot more than that. That cost, $100,000 cost me just to get in the door. If the school cost me $100,000, you want 25%. Yeah, that's our policy. So I didn't have time to be an activist and deal with United Nations, so I went to a different organization. So I left Sudan, came here, and it was just, I was totally a different person. I couldn't think clear. It took me to places that I knew that's what was going to happen. I guess maybe I created it. It took me to places that I don't want to be. The darkness, the despair that I felt, it landed me. I landed at ACU for a month. 2 months later, out of the hospital with an oxygen tank, I couldn't breathe on my own. I was left with 1 lung. But all I can remember was, okay, all I have now is time. So I searched different organizations. And my first question was, do you have a right to work in Sudan? And what's your interest? How much are you going to cost me for you to implement the work in Sudan? I found an organization. It was 5%. Small organization. Then I started searching, can I build high school in the refugee camp? What was that? Can I build a high school in the refugee camp? All the answers, no, 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 no. 6 months later, inshallah. That means God willing. And coming from the West, even though I was from there, is that yes? And you don't question inshallah, and they'll get mad. So finally it was yes. And then, well, it's not just any high school. I want to build a high school for girls. Can we talk to your husband? I don't have a husband. Oh, when did he die? No, I never had a husband. Oh, we really feel for you. Like, okay, can we, we'll find you a husband when you come back. So the conversation would go. So I contacted every person that I met in Sudan. A year later, the answer was yes. 6 months later, the school was built. It's the first high school ever to be built in a refugee camp. I have to research it, but I was told it's actually the first high school ever to be built in any refugee camp around the world. So don't quote me on that, that's what I've been told. So what I'm here to say, to tell you is, even though I lost a lung, I gained a place that will be there way, way after I'm gone. And not all of us can really go through that. I wasn't planning to go through that, but we know someone that could do that. So we don't have to be the starters. We can really, we all can support that who's doing anything, either locally or globally. The fortunate thing that we have here is you don't even think about, building a high school would be a problem. But one of the millennium the problem that we're having in Africa now is educating girls. I couldn't talk about circumcision. I couldn't talk that why you marry them young, because they're looking at me like, wow, you're 40-something and you don't have kids and you've never been married. So I have no right to talk about family, education, girls, circumcision. And circumcision that's just given. We all are circumcised in Africa. That's a subject that I want to talk to, but I can't. But I can educate those girls so they won't be doing that to their children, to their girls. So I want to leave you with something that, just small thing that we do, especially with girls. It can make a big difference. I've seen it, I experienced it, and I live it. So, thank you.